In this video, I'm going to talk about, is Tim Tszyu the luckiest man in the world? Why would I say that? Watch the groovy intro and let's get it going. So Tim Tszyu is a fighter I've been very drawn to for the past couple of years. My close friend James had been telling me Tim Tszyu, Tim Tszyu, Tim Tszyu. I actually lost a Twitter follower to a powerful person in boxing because I said Tim Tszyu beats Brian Castano before the world had seen what Tim was capable of. I still think he beats Brian Castano, but it just kind of shows you that some people in boxing are more about the event aspect to boxing, and at that point Tim Tszyu wasn't a marquee name, so it's unrealistic a non-marquee name could probably beat a guy that was headlining big fights and so forth. So I understand it. It's a difference in seeing the world. It's like trying to tell someone how to spend money and you have two opposite views of how to run a budget. It's no sleight of hand. I'm just more of a purist boxing person, and I'm not as much interested in the boxing or political nature of boxing. So at times I feel like I get blackballed because I just don't care. And that's why I've also started this YouTube channel, is I can have direct conversations and communications with people who find my opinions interesting. But this is not about me, this is about Tim Tszyu. So Tim Tszyu gets a win over Tony Harrison. I think that was a case of a lot of fight fans have seen Tony Harrison. He's a great talker. They got very excited hearing Tony talk. They believed Tony was going to, let's do it again, brother, get the gang back together and outbox Tim Tszyu. I think the problem was a lot of people weren't watching Tim Tszyu's fights. They went off of his fight with Terrell Gausha. Terrell Gausha was actually a more distinguished amateur than Tony Harrison. Tony Harrison's a fantastic fighter, technically sound. The problem with Tony Harrison is he loses focus in fights. What can you not do with Tim Tszyu? You can't lose focus in a fight because he hits friggin' hard and he comes forward and he has pressure. He's like a baby Golovkin. He doesn't quite have the offensive gifts and the thinking of Golovkin, but he puts pressure on, believes in his power, and he's very smart and strategic in what he does. Beats Harrison, comes back. He beats Ocampo quicker than Errol Spence did, points out that he did that. Now he's sitting around waiting, and we've got a bunch of new names potentially coming to his division. So we got the staples. We got Brian Mendoza, really good fighter, interesting story. We got Fundora coming off a loss, not as interesting of a story, but still slightly interesting, compelling. It's always good to see Towering Inferno. Shout out BoxRec Gray. But now you have possibly Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence moving up to 154 pounds. And you also have, no one's bringing this up, Virgil Ortiz entering the 154-pound division. So you have three of the biggest names at or around his division there, and minor details, Jermell Charlo still in the division. Minor details, Jermell Charlo was supposed to fight him, fights Canelo. People go, oh my God, poor Tim Tszyu. No, that's great. Why is it great, Lukie? Why is it great? He's attached to a story with Charlo. That fight now has to happen because the fans associate Tim Tszyu with Jermell Charlo. He's associated. That's a freebie. He's going to get that fight unless he makes a bad decision in life. He's going to get it. That fight's inevitably going to happen. But now Tim Tszyu has at least 2 or 3 big fights. He has a country behind him, Australia. He's selling out in Australia. The question now becomes, at what point does he pick and choose his battles to come to America? Does he only exclusively fight in Australia? Or is he willing to come over and fight a Terrence Crawford on a neutral site? Is he willing to fight an Errol Spence in Cowboy Stadium for the opportunity to be a global ambassador of boxing? He's huge as it is, but would he take these opportunities? I think it's very interesting. I think that we as boxing fans, I say this all the time, just because he's coming forward doesn't mean he's not a boxer. Oftentimes people go, oh, this guy's a boxer. He's got 5 knockouts and he only fights going backwards. Well, that might not even be true. That might be just an athletic guy who's got good hand-eye coordination and knows distance and range. He might not even be the most talented boxer, but I think in our brain we associate distance, range, popping a jab. That's great boxing. Great boxing can also be fighting in the mid-range, closing the gap, changing distance. In many instances, fighting on the inside, you have to be more technically and fundamentally sound. You actually have to have a higher boxing IQ at times to fight on the inside than on the outside in some instances. So I think Tim Tszyu is being heavily underrated because, well, people haven't watched a lot of his fights, and it's kind of like the lazy U.S. rule, right? People are lazy, and if it's not coming on a convenient time, they're not going to watch it. And I think this year you've seen how his growth you've seen how he's become a bigger star. Sure, he's had kind of perfect opposition laid out for him, but that's every fighter that makes money, right? They find fighters that have bits of weakness that they can exploit. That being said, when he fights in primetime in the U.S., he is now being mentioned amongst the great fighters in his division. Sure, his competition stepped up, but he beat Jeff Horn pretty soundly, and nobody watched it in the U.S., and no one cared. Jeff Horn, Brian Castano, sort of similar. I'm not saying they're the exact same, but sort of similar. It matters the platforms to fight fans, especially in the U.S. and the U.K. If these fights are not readily available, if they're not distributed, if there's not a storytelling component, if you're not keeping up with the beats of Fight Week, if people are not producing articles that are fascinating, the fighter is only as good as the attention given. The fighter is only as good as the attention given. So Tim Tszyu, he is getting better, but the platforms and the attention he's getting are also getting better too. Tim Tszyu in 2024 is going to be a part of a major boxing event, one of these big event viewings. And if you look, he's associated with Showtime. What's Showtime doing? Feels like they're transitioning from being more of a boxing telecast program to focusing on making big events where stars come out and doing that, and then having auxiliary boxing content that kind of fills up a schedule. But really, they're trying to put on big events. It's like big events to cater to some boxing fans, but it's really we want to go for the non-boxing fan and hit the luxury price points. That's the focus of what it looks like Showtime is doing, and that's a great business model because that means you make a lot of money. Tim Tszyu, I think, is going to be involved in one of those. Who he fights, I don't know. I mean, I would love to see him versus Errol Spence Jr. in Texas, in Las Vegas. I think that would be a fascinating fight because I think that would really that would be a crossroads fight for both fighters. It would be very, very fascinating. But where Tim Tszyu is right now in the weight division, his very high world ranking, I don't think there's one other person in boxing that's luckier than him currently that isn't a world champion at this very moment. So Tim Tszyu, to me, is the luckiest man in boxing.